Okay, so what we're going to learn today is how to solder. And the two common things, there are two things you're going to need to be able to solder. Is one is a soldering iron, a holder for the soldering iron. We don't want to lay these things on the table. They could roll. And a sponge. The sponge is used to clean the end of the tip of the soldering iron. The other thing we need is solder itself, and they usually come in some sort of holder. Just some information on the soldering iron. This soldering iron is a 25 watt iron. 25 watt is what is commonly used for most all soldering of electronic components. There are larger soldering irons. We have a couple here, but they can easily either burn up the component, electronic component, or lift the trace. You can use a 30 watt soldering iron, and a 30 watt would work fine. It does get a lot hotter a lot faster, so you're going to have to be fairly proficient at soldering in order to use a 30 watt, but it will work. This is a 25 watt, and it pretty much does the trick without having to worry about burning up the component. Don't get me wrong, you can do that. A couple of things. One is the heater elements in this part here, and then this is going to be the tip of the soldering iron. Let's see if you can see that. On the tip of the soldering iron, if you look at the very end of it, and I don't know whether it's viewable in this or not, but if you look at the very end of it, looks shinier than the rest of the soldering iron. And the reason for that is they've actually tinned the end of the soldering iron, or the tip, to where the solder will stick to it. I mean, a regular piece of metal, granted, you can get it hot, and it will melt the solder, but the solder won't stick to it to where you can transfer it to your electronic component. So the one thing you don't ever want to do is to scrape or get this to where it scrapes against another piece of metal. And the reason for that is once you pull the tin off, and you'll find out as these get older, the tin will actually come off because of the fact that the heating it up and then cooling it down when you turn it off and then heating it back up. So it'll eventually come off, but without the tin on there, if you take something in metal and scrape it, you'll scrape the tin off of it, the tin that's on the end of the tip of the soldering tip, and when you try to solder, you won't be able to get the solder to even melt. It won't work at all. So the thing you want to remember is to never scrape it with anything metallic. And what they do have on these is they have a sponge, and what you do with the sponge is you just take it across there and you pull out, and what it'll do, it'll knock off any, and of course you probably noticed it now, it got a little shinier, but it'll knock off any of the what we call slag. It's the impurities of the solder. When you use the solder itself, the impurities that are in it, the solder will go to the component, but the impurities will either stay on the component or they'll adhere themselves to the soldering tip. So you need to clean that off, and it's essentially like putting some sort of insulation on it to where after a while, if there's so much on there, you won't even be able to get, even though it's tinned, you won't be able to get the solder to melt. So what you do is you just take it down there and wipe it off. Solder, on the other hand, there's several different types. The type that we use the most is this type here. I don't know if you can read that or not, but it says 60-40 resin core. And what the 60-40 resin core means is this is 60% lead, 40% tin, and the resin core or rosin core is used to when you solder, it's used to make the solder flow to where it doesn't just come out in globs. So normally when you're going to use solder for electronic components, you get the 60-40. It has a diameter on here, 1 millimeter. This solder here is good for larger electronic components. If you start soldering like transistors and ICs where the spacing for the pins are very close, then you can get this stuff that's a lot thinner. So what we're going to do today is we're going to build a little triangular resistor network. It's going to have 4 nodes to it, and we're going to solder each one of these things together. We're going to put solder on each one of these things together utilizing a soldering gun and solder. see that. Okay. Okay, so what we're going to do here is design a 4-node circuit with the 4 resistors in that location, with the last 2 crossing the 2 points. And this way you have all 4 points has 3 connections to each point. So if you remember this setup here, that you have 3 connected here, 3 connected there, then you shouldn't have any problems putting this together. So what we'll do is we'll put the first 3 together, like so. Get them together, and then take a alligator clip and alligator clip them together. Take the solder, and I usually touch the tip of the solder gun, and then I put the solder to the wires only. See, this is going to work. I need a little primer there. Okay, so those 3 are together, and I'll do the other 3. So what I'll do now is take the 3 that I put together and pull them apart. And make pretty much a 90 out of it. I'll take the other 2 and I'll put the other 2 with one of the other ones that I had soldered. Take the alligator clip, clip them together. Take my solder, solder them together. Now I have everything together and holding, I hope. Make this a 90. And then these 2 should go together along with the last one. Remember, there's 3 on each one. And we'll clip those together. Okay. Now you have that one. Now you have one left. And as you probably notice, it's forming a triangle. So I'm going to bend the tops of each one of these to where they will all come together. Put my alligator clip on. Hold it down. Solder the last one. Then what we have, take the alligator clip off. This is still the same thing. They're still crossed. It's still a square. It's just that the resistor leads for the 2 diagonals have to be longer, so they're not. So essentially what we have is a triangle, which looks a lot like the first one that I built. That's all there is to it.